The Russian news agency Interfax says Russian media gave more airtime to President Trump in January than Vladimir Putin. That is apparently changing as Russian officials scale back their optimism over what one top diplomat calls a new post-West world order. Correspondent Rich Edson has that story tonight from the State Department.
The Kremlin has ordered Russian state media to curtail its positive coverage of President Donald Trump. Russian officials worry the new U.S. administration is less friendly towards Russia than first thought. This is according to Bloomberg, citing 3 people familiar with the matter, as top Trump cabinet members more frequently deliver criticism of Russia.
Our alliance will continue to hold Russia accountable and demand that they honor the Minsk agreements, beginning with de-escalating violence in eastern Ukraine.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense James Mattis have delivered similar messages, warning Russia to honor its commitments to halt violence in eastern Ukraine. President Trump himself has tweeted, quote, "Crimea was taken by Russia during the Obama administration. Was Obama too soft on Russia?" And last week, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed the Western-centric post-World War II order is dissolving.
The whole history stage that can be called post-Cold War order has come to an end. We are convinced that its main result is a failure to apply the Cold War institutions to the new reality.
Russia's top diplomat is a man on a mission. Sergei Lavrov is at the forefront of Moscow's efforts to promote itself as an international power broker, with the Kremlin calling for a new world order.
Ответственные лидеры должны сделать выбор. Надеюсь, что выбор будет сделан в пользу созидания демократического и справедливого мирового порядка. Если хотите, назовите его пост-Вест.
And in the game of geopolitics, Russia has become a major player in Syria. It's provided Bashar al-Assad's regime with military might, from troops on the ground to strikes from the skies, and helped the government secure a seat at the negotiating table. It may be trying to expand its reach. Last week, Russia hosted Kurdish groups from Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria for a conference on the Middle East. On the same day, it brought multiple players involved in the Afghan conflict together for peace talks. Russia has been cultivating contacts with the Taliban as a countermeasure against Daesh, a move which isn't backed by all of the other parties, or a key player which wasn't invited to join the talks. Moscow's displays of military muscle and diplomatic might in Syria have taken place while the country has endured its worst recession in 2 decades. It is slowly emerging from that economic crisis. But the fall in energy prices and Western sanctions have meant less money and fewer jobs for ordinary Russians. The World Bank warned last year that the number of poor people in Russia would rise to more than 20 million, out of a population of about 140 million. In the face of such immense domestic challenges, can this really be the era of a resurgent Russia on the foreign policy front?
A new report shows the amount of weapons being bought and sold around the world is growing. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the number of major weapons transfers over the past 5 years is on par with the end of the Cold War. The independent institute researches conflict, armaments, arms control, and disarmament. It keeps a running database of weapons transfers using government resources, industry reports, and media outlets. Of the more than 100 countries it studied from 2012 to 2016, it found the U.S. exported 1/3 of all major weapons moved. Roughly half of those weapons from the U.S. went to the Middle East. Experts told CNN instability in the region and the rise of ISIS likely helped increase sales. Since 2012, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been the biggest U.S. customers. A researcher told Al Jazeera both countries are using advanced weapons to intervene in Yemen's civil war.
Saudi Arabia had a 212% increase in arms imports over the past 5 years. According to the SIPRI, Riyadh is the world's second largest arms importer after India, while the United States remains the top global exporter. The study says half of Washington's arms exports have been destined for the Middle East since 2012.
You may not know it, but Israel is the 7th largest arms seller in the world, and its companies even account for 2.1% of global weapons sales. Now, Israel is prepared to relax regulations on the exports of weapons in what some are calling a renewed push to reform the industry.
Well, the effort is being led by the Defense Export Control Agency, which is a branch of the Israeli Defense Ministry. And the relaxation of the regulations that I'm going to talk about in my report comes in conjunction with the stiffening of penalties for defense contractors who violate the Defense Export Control Law. Despite a global slowdown in weapons purchases, Israel's industry actually grew by 10% last year. Now, according to a new report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Israel's increase in sales has been reflected on a global scale because worldwide arms trade has risen to its highest level since the Cold War. Of course, the sale of advanced weaponry to foreign nations is a controversial issue within Israel, often creating strange political partnerships.
U.S. officials are alleging that China is close to completing a base for low-range surface-to-air missiles in the South China Sea. According to Reuters, the officials say that China is nearly finished building almost 24 structures on artificial islands in the South China Sea that appear designed to house the weapons. The question now is how the Trump administration will respond. The administration has called China's island building in the South China Sea illegal. During his campaign, the president promised to take a firm stance against the country.
It makes me sad that someone would do something like that.
Pastor Brad Flaskamp doesn't know what to make of it. Twice in 2 weeks, somebody broke the head off this Jesus statue at the Cottage Avenue Pentecostal Fellowship.
I could tell you that I don't think it's kids. It'd have to be a kid that could wield a sledgehammer.
The first time, the vandal left the head behind and church members were able to reattach it. But this time, whoever broke off the head took it with them.
Someone needs Jesus, that's for sure.
Not just his head.
Right, not just his head, that's the truth.
The statue is only 5 years old, but the church itself has been here for about 100 years and has deep, strong ties here in the Bates-Hendricks neighborhood.
I think it's somebody that just has fun destroying other people's things, honestly.
So far, police don't have any leads and will likely need help from the neighborhood.
It is a difficult case to investigate. However, our detectives are very good about trying to connect the dots and get information from those in the community.
The pastor says they only want the head returned. If the vandal brings it back, he won't even call police.
We'd welcome him. We'd welcome him. We'd forgive him. That's what it's all about.
Ivanka Trump has asked Americans to exhibit religious tolerance in a tweet she posted last night. The daughter of the president tweeted a show of support for the Jewish community after 11 more Jewish community centers were targeted with bomb hoaxes on President's Day. Quote, "America is a nation built on the principle of religious tolerance," end quote, she wrote. "We must protect our houses of worship and religious centers. Hate crimes and threats against Jewish community centers have been on the rise. 11 JCCs were evacuated yesterday in Birmingham, Cleveland, Chicago, St. Paul, Tampa, Tulsa, Nashville, Milwaukee, Houston, and Buffalo because of bomb threats. All appeared to be hoaxes, and no one was injured. The FBI launched a hate crime investigation into JCCs last month after the centers received 60 threats. The White House responded to a reporter's query about the latest string of bomb threats called into Jewish community centers by saying, quote, "These actions are unacceptable," end quote.
During President's Day weekend, 3 of Washington's best-known monuments were defaced with graffiti. According to a National Park Service spokesman, this is the 3rd major vandalism of memorials in the U.S. Capitol since 2013. The World War II Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, and Washington Monument were all defaced with a marker pen at some point between Sunday night and Monday morning.
On a sunny day in Berlin, some of Europe's leading police officers gathered to discuss the way ahead. On the sidelines of the conference were all the latest innovations to help them. The political imperative behind this annual event was clear: how to build a strong state for a strong Europe. Germany's interior minister was keen to spell out what that meant.
Europe must decide who can come to Europe and who stays in Europe. Europe must know who is coming to Europe and then leaves again. And the member states, the security authorities, must know about interesting security-related knowledge that other member states have made about people.
Looming over this conference is the spate of violent attacks that struck Europe in 2016. December's Berlin Christmas market attack killed 12 people and wounded 56 more. Border security has become a key issue at this conference. At least 3 of the violent acts carried out in Germany in 2016 were done so by people who claimed to be refugees.
Riots erupted, cars were burned, stores looted, a police officer was forced to use his gun, which is a rarity in Sweden. It's in the same area where they've had problems before. A film crew, to Army's point, a film crew from Australia's 60 Minutes were attacked, not last night, but were attacked in the same area last year. Some call it a no-go zone. The Swedish police like to classify it as an area of particular vulnerability.
That's extraordinary, because the authorities are kind of glossing over the immigrant impact on Sweden, and we have a riot erupting like this.
The Islamic State is vowing more attacks on Egyptian Christians. A new ISIS video shows the suicide bomber who attacked a Cairo church in December, saying Christians are the group's favorite prey, and that December's attacks were only the beginning. Egypt's Coptic Christians make up around 10% of the population. They've been increasingly targeted by Muslim extremists.
Far-right French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen canceled a meeting with Lebanon's top Sunni cleric after being told she would have to wear a headscarf. Le Pen was apparently presented with the headscarf when she arrived at the office of Lebanon's Grand Mufti. She refused to put it on and walked out of the meeting. Female non-Muslim dignitaries have occasionally opted to cover their heads while working in Muslim-majority countries. Sweden's trade minister was recently criticized for wearing a veil during a state trip to Iran. But Le Pen's brand of nationalism has put her at odds with the Islamic garb. She previously vowed to ban all religious symbols in public if elected president. Le Pen is currently projected to earn enough votes to survive the first round of France's presidential elections on April 23rd. She's not predicted to win a runoff, but the polls have been tightening in recent weeks.
The Italian capital Rome, scuffles have broken out between protesting taxi drivers and riot police. Several people were injured in the confrontations that erupted after the Italian lower house of parliament approved the so-called Uber Amendment Bill. The draft has already received the backing of the Senate and would see easing regulations for taxi companies. Opponents believe it would be to the benefit of internet-based and app-based taxi companies such as Uber. Italian taxi drivers have also voiced opposition to the bill by holding protests for the past 6 days. Similar rallies were held in Milan and Turin.
The Greek people have seen their fair share of bailout deals. Both they and the papers say the latest is no different. A high price, this headline predicts, for the return of the Troika.
Of course they will come with a cost. There is no way they won't.
Lies. So many lies. They lie all the time.
Greece is struggling. After almost 7 years of austerity policies, the country has sunk from recession into a full-blown depression, affecting people from all walks of life. Inside the municipality-run Athens Solidarity Centre, Greeks wait with a ticket in hand to get their share of handouts, such as food products or clothing. But sometimes the centre struggles too. About 26,000 people are registered here, up from 2,500. A survey has found that over 75% of households suffered a significant income reduction last year. A third had at least one unemployed member, and as many as 40% said they had to cut back on food spending. In Athens, many go to soup kitchens for their daily meal, and many don't turn on the heat. One such church-run soup kitchen serves 400 meals on a daily basis. A 61-year-old unemployed volunteer, Eva Agki-Salaki, herself a recipient of food handouts, says she struggles every day.
We just exist these days. Most Greeks just exist.
A survey conducted in December found that over 92% of Greeks said the debt crisis had affected them.
Bolivian coca growers clash with riot police in La Paz Tuesday, angry over a draft government bill that would legalize 20,000 hectares of land for the growing of coca leaves. And that, protesters say, would introduce unwelcome competition for the Los Yungas coca growers. The bill extends legality of around 7,000 hectares of land in the El Chapare region, where President Evo Morales was the leader of an illegal coca growers union before taking office. Clashes heated up Monday and went into the night, with dozens reportedly arrested and one person seriously injured. The government says increasing the land is necessary to satisfy the local market. But these protesters say they want Morales to hear them out.
Food prices have been rapidly climbing in East Africa due to a severe drought that has left thousands of people struggling to cope with the situation. According to agricultural officials, low and unpredictable rainfall in recent months has caused substantial damage to agricultural output in many parts of the region.
It's a very big challenge for the country and for the region, and particularly for the Minister of Agriculture, to continue thinking that we must depend on the vagaries of nature. That can no longer work today because the climate is changing so fast.
The government says that cereal prices have reached record high in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, South Sudan, Somalia and Ethiopia. The rising staple food prices are reportedly constraining food access for large numbers of households, raising alarms about consequences of food insecurity. Children are also allegedly going without food in many parts of the region due to failure by farmers to harvest crops as a result of poor yields caused by the severe drought. Cereal prices are reportedly not the only ones rising. Beans now cost 40% more in Kenya than a year earlier, while in Uganda, corn prices are now up by 75% compared to a year earlier. Drought-affected pastoral areas in East Africa are facing severer conditions, with shortage of pasture and water causing reduced body mass for hundreds of animals.
France is to cull a further 360,000 ducks as part of efforts to prevent the spread of the H5N8 bird flu virus. The slaughter will take place in Landes, the Pyrenees and Atlantic regions in the southwest of the country. The area is home to most of France's foie gras producers. France and Hungary have been the countries hardest hit by the highly contagious H5N8 virus that's been spreading across Europe, the Middle East and African countries in the past 3 months.
Storms are battering Northern California for a third day in a row. The heavy rain is making creeks and rivers swell in an already soaked region. Storms triggered mudslides in Santa Cruz at south of San Francisco, and that area could see up to 8 inches of rain before the storm moves away later today. 8 more inches.
Threat of flooding continues across Northern California. The water rushing out of the overflowing Anderson Reservoir is swelling creeks in its path, while those living downstream wait and worry.
If the creek were to overflow, the flood pattern is just going to come right through this whole neighborhood.
It's not the only reservoir filled to capacity by recent rains. For the first time in 20 years, officials Monday were forced to open the spillway at the Don Pedro Reservoir, about 2 hours south of Sacramento. The last time that happened, it contributed to the flooding in areas in and around the town of Modesto.
We're going to keep the spillway open for 4 days. We're going to release enough water so that we can accommodate the storms that are coming in.
In Oroville, engineers say the dam spillway is stable and able to handle the rain.
Occasionally we see some erosion here and there, but nothing that's of concern at this time.
Nearly 200,000 residents who live below it are still under an evacuation warning, told to be prepared to leave if necessary. Meanwhile, hundreds were forced to evacuate quickly in San Joaquin County, south of Sacramento, late Monday. Officials say they were able to halt a developing breach in a levee that could have impacted dozens of rural homes. The rain is also creating headaches in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 2 hours south of San Francisco, where mudslides have blocked roads and toppled trees. When this giant fir tree fell near Santa Cruz, commuters with chainsaws helped to clear the road before firefighters arrived. The county's public works superintendent says this winter season has been relentless.
We're tired. Our crews have 1 day a week off if they're lucky.
Since California's rainy season began in October, San Francisco has logged more than 24 inches of rain. That's already above the city's normal annual rainfall total.
Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, is overwhelmed by flooding after almost 6 inches of rain fell in 24 hours. In East Jakarta, water stood almost 5 feet high on February 21st. Thousands of homes are flooded, schools have been closed, and many workers have been forced to stay home. The city often experiences flooding this time of year, but heavy rainfall isn't the sole contributor to annual flooding. The Guardian reported last year Jakarta is sinking from 3 centimetres per year to 20 centimetres per year in some areas. It's a result of residents extracting drinking water from shallow aquifers below the city, causing the land above it to collapse. Jakarta also has up to 13 rivers in it, which often burst their banks when monsoon season rolls around.
A 56-year-old woman jumped into the line of duty over the weekend. So here's what happened. Vicki Williams Tillman was driving when she saw a man attacking a police officer. She pulled over and called 911.
But when the suspect grabbed the officer's baton and started hitting him with it, she knew she had to do more. The grandmother hurled herself onto the suspect's back.
You could see it in his eyes that he needed help, and I just wasn't going to walk away from that. And no fear at all, just walked around.
Next thing I knew, she was pulling the suspect's hand off my gun.
Hashtag no fear. The attacker was arrested and faces multiple charges. The Baton Rouge Police Department says Williams Tillman is a true hero.
She is.